Bizarre Brain Comics. Hello, my comic book friends, and welcome to Bizarre Brain Comics. I am Gary, your host. This is where I like to take a look at some older comics, talk a little bit about the characters and creators, and then examine the stories and the art. And this time around, I want to revisit Jack Chick Publishing. I've had a couple of episodes about some Jack Chick before, but in those times I talked specifically about these two books, regular-sized comic books, and we'll be revisiting some others because Chick had a bunch of others as well. But this time I want to talk specifically a little bit about their small tracts. I did cover them a little bit on the first video featuring Jack Chick, and I gave his background. He was a war veteran. I can't remember if it was World War II or Korea, and afterwards he is when he got really religious. He had done some cartooning, had a short-lived newspaper strip, and eventually started doing some tracts, and he did them on his own. When I say that religious tracts, these comic style religious tracts like this, and those caught on. And of course he was inspired by the when he learned about Chinese communists who, in imitation of American comics, started creating small comics in this format for their communist propaganda for their people. And so, inspired by that, he decided to use the same format to spread his propaganda. And it is propaganda in his case. Not all the religious tracts or religious comics are necessarily propaganda, but his are propaganda. So he started the company in I think it was 1970, but he had already been producing. It was just when he formally started his company, Jack Chick Publishing, and focused entirely on producing these tracts as a business, and they became popular, and almost everyone has come across Chick tracts somewhere in the wild. I found several of them over the years. One of the most notorious ones was one I used to have, and I don't know why I don't have it now, is one about the Dungeons and Dragons games. And I think it was produced in the early 80s, maybe. And it was notorious for being terribly wrong about the game and the effects on the players, etc. And there was some independent, very, very independent filmmakers who made a film version of it with Jack Chick's consent and enthusiasm. But I just don't think he realized that their movie was a parody of his work. But it was but it presented it in I've never seen the entire thing, but I've seen clips from it, and they presented it just as it appeared in his track, or almost, just because it's a short film, and it is laughable. It's, well, part of that's just because of the acting, I guess, because it's amateur production. But anyway, churches would order these in bundles of 100 of a specific title, and they would be spread all over the place. That's why I said they're pervasive. Although I can't say that I've come across one in the wild for several years. And these that I've got, this is a bunch that I ordered from Chick Publishing back in '87, which I got at the time all of the full-sized comics that they had at the time, and lots of the Tracts. And there's so many of them. And I think it was 2018 when Jack Chick passed away, and and they are still producing. Over the years, he produced, initially he produced all the little tracts himself, and eventually he hired some artists to do some of the work, especially on the full-sized comics. But they worked completely uncredited, and he didn't say that he produced them. At the time, I think they were all written by him, and but now, from what I understand, they're still in production, but some of them are being redrawn with different artists, and sometimes trying to make them more appealing to a wider audience. That is, because most of his stuff was, well, it's an extreme brand of fundamentalism, and primarily white fundamentalism, and they're altering the redoing some with minority characters of various stripes, and also they've been translated to all kinds of languages and distributed all over the world, and that helps also with the with acceptance in some of the non-primarily Caucasian countries of the world. Well, let's just take just a little look in some of them here. It looks like the Big Daddy. It's just about evolution. Now he's notorious for having just bizarre notions, totally bogus science. Reverend Powerful, I'm not sure what. And definitely strong anti-Catholic sentiments, and I'm also strong pro-Israel anything, but there's a reason for it. And while they're not, I don't think I've ever seen anything that was explicitly anti-Semitic that I can think of. A lot of the bad guys in the stories definitely look Jewish. Now, the reason that they are so pro-Israel is like so many of the fundamentalist churches who are otherwise often anti-Semitic is because it's for the fulfillment of their theology, from what I understand. Israel is necessary, primarily for the book of Revelations to come true. Here, this is squatters. This one is pro-Israel. This one, and very much anti Muslim, and but while also being anti-Catholic, because it basically blames the Catholics for World War II and Hitler's anti-Semitism, which the Catholic Church has bad stuff going on during that period. Definitely. And but the artwork has changed. Like I said, he hired other artists. Like I think this is his work. Yeah, I think this is Jack's work himself. But then you get others like the stuff on these. Even see the beautiful cover paintings on those full-size comics. And it has a lot of stuff about demon possession and demon influence and anti-atheism, as one would expect for that. But his theology is really a mixed bag. Anti-Halloween, boo, anti-rock and roll, anti-movie, anti-everything. Here's in the stories. These are mostly, and they're known for being, having a bit of a storyline, and then devolving into extreme preachiness. Usually having a character die in the end, either going to heaven or hell, depending on whether or not they had become Christians, specifically his brand of Christians. Let's fly away. Yeah. Here's one about the rapture. But it's sorry. There's a whole bunch more than what I've got here. But that will have to do. And I wish I had that one on. The history, world history, religious history, is just atrociously incorrect, just as made up as their science. And I don't know. And as I said, terribly anti-Catholic. In the full-size comics, they had a whole mini-series. I think it was 5 parts, based on something from a former priest, supposedly. I think his stuff has been debunked, but it's still out there, of how the Catholic Church is part of a Satanist cabal to take over the world and stuff like that. And here's a silly little one about trying to make an analogy between this kid trying to make friends with ants and God, which is a fatally flawed analogy. One can see the analogy, but it breaks down too soon. And then the last surprise. And but you can see the wonderful artwork that they had here in the comics, which is I showed before. More story, more in-depth storytelling in the beginning, and then of course they devolve into extreme propaganda and preachiness. And that's just another examination of Jack Chick Publishing. So, thank you for joining me. Please like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Come on, people, I need some comments. And normally I don't comment on theology and the religious stuff I do, but I only focus on the theology of Jack Chick insofar as it is extremism, and it fed right into and played a big part of the buildup of the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s, if you're old enough to remember that. Especially stuff like this. So thank you for joining me, and remember, comics are art.